Well, it's another Monday morning, and I just wanted to uh, have a little chat here with you guys again, the ones of you that are watching. Um, and one of the things that I was wanting to talk about today was whenever a vehicle reaches a certain age, there's situations that arise make you wonder if you should be pouring a lot of time and energy into one that's an older vehicle, because if the customer tells you to fix it, because they just say go ahead and fix it, and then you go ahead and fix it and they don't have the money to pay for it, you can have more of your resources invested in the vehicle than that vehicle is worth. I've seen some scary situations that turned out okay. When we had the dealership I was working at first bought the Renault franchise and Jeep, and basically we got it because Jeep and Renault were together back in the late 80s. There was a car that came from the other dealership, which had shut down, to ours, and it was a Renault 18i. Now this is a funky little station wagon. It's got peculiar properties about it. It's got Bosch fuel injection, one of those old engine controllers on it. It was under the seat, which is never a good place to put any controller. Some of the airbag controllers on Jeeps had to be moved from under the seat in about 2000, because if they got a little bit wet, they might light the airbag off without warning, and we had to move them up on the tunnel up under the console. But the point is, this thing came in and it was a no start, and so the literature, the shop manual literature of Renault's was never all that good. Renault is the right way to say it, but Renault's what it looks like, and whichever way you want to say it, it's the same car. And those things were a grand adventure anyway. But the long and the short of it was, I got that thing into the shop, and it had a strange little affair for the ignition, to where they had a GM ignition module mounted on a little heat sink plate, and it was firing the coil. It was just a strange thing. They had to pick up a coil. It was a remotely mounted module, just like you'd find in an old GM distributor. Some of y'all might be familiar with that. But the point, I got that thing, I said, well, this module's not working. I figured that out because I didn't have any spark. Well, I put the module on there and it got spark, but it still wouldn't start. And so then I did further investigation, just looking around, and I smelled burned electronics whenever I went to where the engine controller was. And I pulled the engine controller open and it had been wet. I guess the car had been flooded or rained in or something, and it destroyed the engine controller. Well, I knew, there comes a point where you need to say, we need this before we can go any farther. And that's where I was. The car was probably worth $100 sitting beside the road, sold for junk. I mean, this was just not a car that I would have spent any money. I think it was an 81 model, not particularly a very popular model. I went ahead and told them I'd priced out an engine controller. And the engine controller was $1,800 for that car. And so when we told the customer they needed an $1,800 engine controller, the customer said, sure, go ahead and do it. And I was that shakes you up when you tell them that and they say, sure, go ahead and do it. Now, the smart thing to do is to get them to pay for the part up front. But the long and the short of it is, we went ahead and put the new engine controller on there, fired it up, drove it out of the shop, ran great. They were happy. They paid the bill, drove away. It's amazing to me anybody would pay that much to get a car like that fixed. So the point of all this is, you got to determine if the vehicle you're working on is worth what you're going to spend on it. Another time, there was an 80 model Ford pickup that came in that was rusted out. I mean, if you grabbed the sides of the bed, you could actually move them about 5 or 6 inches either way, because it was so rusty. When you mashed the clutch, and it had a manual transmission in it, when you mashed the clutch, the bulkhead was so worn that the whole dash would distort when you mashed the clutch, because it would move things. It was just incredibly scary to even sit down in that thing. Well, the guy that brought it in wanted the engine fixed. Whatever was wrong with the engine, I don't know. I didn't do that work. But the long and the short of it is, he said go ahead and do it. A $1,200 engine job. The service writer got the okay, gave the ticket to the mechanic, and the work was done. The engine was fixed, but the guy didn't have the money to pay for it. So we had $1,200 in a truck that probably should have been rolled off of a cliff to begin with. had a mechanic lien on it, and when it was taken down to the auction where the mechanic liens are done, the general manager, he knew somehow, I don't know how, that the guy that owned that truck that had okayed the repair was going to be down there and was going to try to buy it for $200-300 so he could get this $1,200 engine job for almost nothing. And so the general manager sent a salesman down there and says, do not let this truck go for less than the full amount of the bill. And so the end result of it was we wound up bringing the truck back because the guy wasn't going to bid as much as the bill was anyway. And that guy was there. But we used that truck to haul junk iron and all kinds of stuff around there. But that was the sorriest piece of trash wore out pickup I ever saw. And somebody should have got money up front before we ever built the engine. That was a whole big deal. And you can get in some trouble like that, you know. Anyway, his friend called me to tell me his nephew's 92 Cavalier had gone belly up at the credit union. This thing just sitting out there at the credit union wouldn't start. It was like 90 or 100 degrees out. It was really hot that day. I don't moonlight, but this guy's my number one lunch partner, so I found myself committed. That's the actual picture of the car. All right, and so when we opened the hood, this was what was funny. We found a bird nest under the hood. That is an actual picture of the under hood of this car with a bird nest by the AC accumulator. But it had no spark. Number one plug wire was burned out, and of course if your plug wire is burned out because somebody lets the plugs go too long because the resistance went up in the plugs, and then the spark's always looking for an easier place to go. So it had actually burned that plug wire out, and whenever there's a spike like that, you know, I don't know if you've noticed, if you can go to one that's got the primary and the, you know, the lead where you can get to the one that goes to the tack, you know, the trigger side of the coil. If you hook a test light to that, and I've actually got a video on my YouTube channel about it called Poor Man's Scope. If you can hook that up, and if it's running, and you've got a plug wire that's unhooked or open, the pulse will be a lot brighter when it tries to fire that particular plug. And I've actually done that. You know, when I was checking ignition stuff on the older vehicles that used to have just one coil, I would spray some soapy water on the plug wire, see if it started popping anywhere. Then I would hook that scope, that up, and if it didn't pulse, while I had my test light, which is like a 1/4 of an amp draw, it's like a low impedance test light, I would snap the throttle with the test light connected to the tack terminal, and if it stumbled and fell on its face, just snapping it in, I knew the plugs were wore out. It wouldn't do that if it had good plugs in it. Anyway, you can't take that across the board now because you got a lot of coil plug stuff and all that. You know, those rules are different now, but and I used them mostly on Fords. Anyway, the Cavalier on the left, we got rid of the bird's nest, put the used up spark plug, burned out ignition cables, dead module. This module's on the back of the block, you know, it's back there where the distributor used to be. And we actually, and some of them have this thing in a, you know, this crank sensor in a separate place. Some of them's got it made right on the module. Anyway, we swapped all this out for about $400 worth of parts. And, you know, we put the plugs and the wires and all that kind of stuff on it. And we got that straightened out. This same car earlier had come to me with the flywheel destroyed because somebody had put a starter on it and they had put the shim, the thickest doggone GM starter shim I had ever seen was on there. And that's what was on the starter when the guy changed it. So he put that back on there apparently because it looked like an old shim. And it had the starter far enough from the flywheel that it destroyed the flywheel. So we wound up having to put a flywheel on. But that was before all this happened. Anyway, this elderly lady I've known all my life has got this 87 Cutlass Sierra. Now this lady's already passed away now, but I went to church with her years ago and knew her for a long, long time. It stalled in town, so she took it to a local shop, not far from where I'm sitting right now. And it was not a dealership, it was an independent shop. And that shop didn't do anything to this car. You know, a lot of the shops don't want to work on something old. They want to work on something that's crisp and new. They put a fuel filter on it and charged her whatever they charged to put a fuel filter on one and troubleshoot. She drove across town, and as soon as she got out of the car at the grocery store, there was a whole lot of gas leaking out from under there where the fuel filter was. And so she called them and said, hey, I've got a bad gas leak on my car. You know, she's a little white-haired lady, you know, in her late 80s. So they sent a wrecker over there to get the car, hauled it back to their shop, fixed the fuel leak, charged her for the wrecker, charged her for fixing the fuel leak, and she wound up paying another $85 over what she had originally paid to get the car fixed when it wasn't fixed to start with. Anyway, we wound up with this one here because it was, you know, cutting up and stalling and running awful and all that. All right, and so here we go. Her complaint was it ran rough and had a bad vibration and would sometimes stall while driving. This thing did idle rough. It was, you know, just cutting up and shaking and not just poor idle quality. And when we drove it, it would literally nearly shake your teeth out. I don't know how they even got it over there to where our shop was, but we had to put tires on it, 2 tires on it, and that smoothed up the shaking while you were driving. But it still idled rough. And the interesting thing about it was, we wound up looking at these here spark plugs. Now, the reason that that dusty, rusty looking thing right there happened, I don't know if you've ever probably seen that a lot of the time. Whenever a spark happens, and it's a naked spark, it not only produces RFI, it also produces ozone, which is O3. And O3 is very corrosive. And that's why a lot of the times when you pull a plug wire off, it looks like that one. It's got that old dusty, rusty look to it because that O3 has been trapped in that boot, and it's been working on all that metal and trying to dissolve it, you know, just because of oxidation and all. But anyway, and this was the old Magnavox ignition system. You know, they had 2 different ones, one with the 3 coils and the one where they were all made together. All right, with the plugs and wires replaced, it still idled rough and the intake manifold was hot. Now, if you got one that's idling rough and the intake manifold feels hot to the touch, what does that typically mean? Well, it usually means EGR is flowing. If you've got a rough idle and a hot manifold on one that you've just started, like if the manifold starts to get hot right away. So I went ahead and we checked the EGR. There was no vacuum going to the EGR. Pull the EGR valve off to see if there was any exhaust passing through it, but there wasn't. Okay, so what in the world is going on here? We had low vacuum too, which was another thing that pointed me in the direction of EGR. Anyway, with the scope tracing the cam and crank sensors, Bert was working on it. He was one of my guys. There was no cam signal. There was a crank signal, but there was no cam signal. All right. We found the wires leading to the cam sensor connector had lost their insulation and they were touching each other and all that. And so we swapped out the cam sensor and we put we fixed this with heat shrink and all, and we put the cam sensor in there and we got a signal on the cam sensor, and with the cam signal back and all of that fixed, oddly enough, the manifold was cool. It idled so smooth. It was just a totally different car in that regard. But we took it on one last test drive. All right, the problem on the test drive, we finally found their primary concern. This is kind of like that rattle that the customer says it's got, and they've ignored everything else that's wrong with the car, and that one thing is all they're concerned about, if you understand what I'm saying. Okay, so what we have here going on is we've got something else we got to find. So what we did was we got a timing light, and with that timing light, what we wound up doing was we put it on one of the wires, and we brought it inside the car with us. And with it inside the car, we pulled the trigger, and we had it, we actually had the trigger taped so that it would stay pulled all the time, and it was under the dash where you could see it good, and it was a timing light with had long leads. And so while we were driving it, every time the engine cut up and tried to stall, the timing light was cutting up too. And so in my mind, that pinpointed that Magnavox module, which had probably been compromised by that burned out plug wire, similar to what had happened on that other car. Well, we put a module on it, and her car was good to go. She did have, by the time she paid for the tires and everything, pretty good sized bill, but at least the car was fixed so that she could drive it. Now, it was an 85 model, and she put a little bit of money in it to get it back on the road where she could drive it without it shaking her teeth out and stalling every time she turned around. And that was the deal there. All right, so bad wires and plugs that cause collateral damage here. A lot of people have the idea that as long as it's running good, you don't do anything to it, but there's some maintenance that needs to be done just because it's time to do it. here's a 97 626. It was a car that had been parked in a barn for a while. You gotta love those those barn cars, you know. All right, and so he said, I put a used starter on it, but it started running really bad, now it won't start. That was his original concern, and they said the coil was weak. They went out there and they said, the coil is weak. It's got a really weak spark. Because I had taught them to always make sure you've got a good, strong spark. And one of the guys at the Ford place came in and told me, he said, I was having trouble checking the spark in the bright sunlight because it's hard to see that spark whenever you're, and I said, well, you need one of those SSTs. He said, SST, what's that, special service tool? And I said, no, it's a shaded spark tester, which was a joke. I just came up with it, made it up as I went along. But the point is, you got to get where you can see good. Now, when we got that thing pushed into the shop and checked the spark was good and strong, blue-white, popping really hard. There wasn't a problem with the spark, so we had to make sure we had good data there. All right, the pump, though, was pulling about 10 amps, but it wasn't spinning, and it had looked like this when we pulled it out. Don't you just love those? Because that means the entire gas tank looks like that, too. We had to pull the gas tank off, we had to steam it out, we had to flush the fuel lines, just all that kind of stuff. And who knows what kind of crud's going to get clogged up in the injectors, you know. One way or another, we got it running pretty doggone good. But we actually had some issues with the starter again. All right, so this was what the starter looks like on that. If you've ever changed one of those, you know what I'm talking about. It bolts on there real peculiar. And we were testing this starter because it sounded really sick. And the long and the short of it was, I found on this particular vehicle voltage drop on the solenoid wire. This is the wire that triggers the starter to close. So we went from the positive battery terminal to the solenoid wire, and you know, we noticed when we jumped it with the screwdriver directly to the solenoid wire, you know, terminal, it would spin to beat the band. But if you tried to turn it with a key, it would spin really slow. Now, the voltage drop between the ignition switch, the neutral safety switch, and there collectively was enough so that it barely had enough energy to pull that copper washer against those two terminals inside the solenoid and spin it. And they wind up getting scorched and everything, and there was voltage drop. Low voltage does what to a starter? Low voltage ruins a starter. And so this guy right here didn't want to spend a lot of time and energy and effort tracking down exactly where the voltage drop was. So what we basically did was we wired a button so that it was still going through the neutral safety switch, but he would switch on the key and then start it with a button after we put another new starter on it. So anyway, that took care of that, but that was a weird one there. This no crank was on a 2001 Malibu unmarked cop car. Somebody had put a battery in this thing because sometimes it wouldn't spin over, wouldn't even make a sound, or you know, and they thought it was anti-theft because if you look at the other side of this terminal right here, whoever it was that put the battery in it, I don't know who did that, because they came to me, can you look at this, because they don't spend a lot of money on it. And it was a state trooper car actually, but it was a sleeper. It was one of those cars that they wanted to have as an unmarked car so nobody knew it was a state trooper car, you know, the old Malibu. Anyway, I looked at it, and whoever had put the battery in there didn't even look at the battery terminal. You know, you're supposed to look at them GM terminals, see what they look like. This one here looked like that. And so we actually had 7 volts of drop between the B plus and the starter. Of course, if you jiggled it, sometimes it would start. Anyway, I got a $16 cable and helped out the state troopers on that one, you know. All right, so this 97 Accord that wouldn't stop, they just kept on driving it till it really got dangerous. I don't know if you've ever seen this kind of thing before, but people have a tendency to work around whatever problem they have. I remember on Click and Clack, I used to listen to them sometimes. They were so funny, and they pretty much knew what they were talking about, too. This one lady called in, and she had some kind of a European car, a Volvo or something, or a Saab, I don't remember what it was. And she said that the ignition key was, you stick it down in the console to crank it up. And she said that when it wouldn't crank, she would take a little water that she kept with her in a cup and just pour in the ignition switch, and then it would start. It's amazing what people will do just to work around. I'm sure some of my guys on here will have stories similar to that. They can tell if they make comments on this video, or if they don't. I'm sure you can think of some anyway. Mike Ponder has got some of the best stories I've ever read whenever he comes through. But anyway, They just kept on driving until it got dangerous, and they just kept stopping it until it wouldn't stop. There was nothing left, you know. And so anyway, we wound up having to redo the brakes on that one. Here's a 99 Chevy, a J.B. Weld artist. How many of these people have you ever heard talking about how wonderful J.B. Weld is and about how they built a couple of pistons with it and drove the car to Chicago and all that kind of hogwash? Well, this person here just kept on, this heater hose pipe that comes out of the manifold going back, that thing loves to twist off because it's pewter anyway. It's a piece of junk. And if it twists off, that most people just don't know what to do. They don't want to take it easy out. They don't have a tap, half-inch pipe thread tap or whatever. So what they do is they just try to stick something in there and pack a bunch of JB Weld around it because they really believe in this JB Weld stuff. Anyway, that's one here was just loaded with JB Weld. This is literally, we chipped all that nonsense off and we tapped that out and fixed the threads and we made that happen. But I just wanted to show you that because that was cool. Now the 2007 543 valve plug job. One of the things I found out not long, pretty good while before I retired from teaching, was if you've got you ever seen these little thing? It's not an air ratchet, but it's made by Ingersoll Rand. It works like an impact wrench, but it's a 90-degree thing, and it's shaped vaguely similar to an air ratchet. If you got one of those things and you put a socket on these plugs, now let your conscience be your guide. Do these any way you've been doing them. But one of the things that I found out, because I felt like, what have we got to lose anyway? And I tell the customer going in, I said, we're going to go ahead and try to get these things out of there with an impact wrench. And if you put an impact wrench on there, you'll pull just about every doggone one of those plugs out, even if the engine's cold. And I've had several of them in a row that we've done without even pulling a single nose off of a plug. Well, anyway, Bobby didn't know that. He was pulling the plugs out slowly. And anybody that's worked on any 5.4s has had this. And you got to get this special tool. Usually the special tool, if you have to use it very much, the threads are gone on the tip where it bites into that little sleeve. And that's annoying. One way or another, when we started impact wrenching those things out of there, it breaks that carbon bond that caused this to stay in there. If you turn it slow, that can unfold. Now Champion, to their credit, makes some spark plugs that are all one piece that won't come apart. And I think they were trying to work on that. Anyway, he managed to fight with that and got all those out of there. One of them, he actually put JB Weld on it, let it set up, and screwed it out and all that, But you wind up in a mess with those. You know what this is? We got some questions here. Have you ever seen one of these? Do you have any idea what it's for? I worked at several old shops, where I would see one of these doggone things laying around. And I would look at that thing, and some people say, what is it, a soldering iron? Or what is it? It's heavy. It's a heavy doggone thing. And it's got a washer on it that's a little bit rattling around loose. And it's got a handle. And believe it or not, that thing's got a part number. Well, I'm going to show you what that thing is used for. If you look, this is the shop manual. If you recognize that, you recognize the inner part, the ball nut part of a doggone steering box. All right. Now I've actually took these steering boxes apart. You got to stick that in there, and what you do is you put those balls in there, and that keeps those balls from falling down inside because it's just the right side or whatever. It's basically for that. Which just totally blew me away when I finally found it. The part number, if you want to look this up, is J21552. And I believe that's a Kent Moore number if I remember right. But anyway, I just thought we'd have some fun with that. What caused this 2000 Corolla to sludge up? Believe it or not, that was a warranty job. The PCV system on those cars didn't work right, and it basically wound up sludging enough of the engines up. And whenever you're in a situation where an engine is sludged up in a dealer situation, you don't desludge the engine, or we never did, and none of the dealers around here ever did that I know. And even Toyota said if the engine is sludged up, replace the engine. So they replaced quite a few of these engines with the PCV system was modified, But that was what happened to that one. That's an actual photo I took of that at the Toyota dealership. What code would you get because of this? Do you recognize this at all? If you've worked on Crown Victorias, you will see this little area. This is clogged up with carbon, which is something that loves to happen, and that is the EGR passage. And when that EGR passage clogged up, it's not very difficult to pull this off there and clean that nonsense out of there. but that gets rid of your P0401 code. What I like to do when I got a P0401 code is I like to open the EGR valve and see if the engine loses idle quality. And I do this with it idling. If the EGR valve is opening but there's no flow, then I go looking for clogging. It doesn't matter if it's a GM or what it is. And we've seen that on quite a few of those. And it'll clog on GM cars too, and on some of the other ones. It clogs up with that carbon. What's the purpose of this test? You might notice that the vent solenoid has been connected in place of the canister. Now the reason that I did this was because I was looking for an evaporative leak, and I suspected that the canister was that. So when I put that piece of hose, which fit nice and snug there in there, on there, and I ran my test, I was able to determine that after all there was a leak in here. It didn't even show up with the smoke machine. Okay, so that's what I did on that one. Alright, why do I need a refrigerant identifier? This, believe it or not, was on a 2006 Jeep Commander that we worked on, and we actually had to pull the compressor off to get the valve cover off because one of the roller rockers was out of place down in there for some reason or another. Anyway, when we did our refrigerant identification, Neutronics makes these testers. They're kind of pricey, but if you're serious about doing air conditioner work the right way, every shop needs a refrigerant identifier. Some recycler machines now have got a refrigerant identifier on them built in. This is a standalone identifier that I had over at the school. This one had 5.5% hydrocarbons in it. I have seen them where they were 100% R12 when they were supposed to have R134, or they were 20 or 30% R12 and the rest of them. See, if you pull that stuff into your machine, because you're never supposed to vent refrigerant to the atmosphere, and then you put it in another vehicle, you're messing up that other vehicle by pumping a bunch of contaminated refrigerant into it. You let your conscience be your guide, and you need ESCO certification if you're going to be working on air conditioners anyway, because it's a $30,000 fine if the mechanic doing the work does not have ESCO certification. It's not hard to get it. ESCO Institute. Look that up online. Doesn't cost very much. It's an open book test. You can get ESCO certified legitimately, and then you can basically have that card in your wallet and a little certificate hanging by your toolbox to add another credential. But anyway, it's a good idea to have a refrigerant identifier. What would this cause? Some of you guys that have worked on some of your later model Chevrolet pickups, well, I mean right after the turn of the century, will have found a problem like this. This right here is a little junction block that feeds your lights in the back. When the lights in the back aren't working, if you unplug that and you see pins broke off and rotted out and all, you got issues and you got to take care of that problem. That's what was going on with this one. Alright, what's being done here? If you've ever worked on any Fords, Crown Victorias or Lincolns or whatever, or some of your pickup trucks, this right here is positioning the crankshaft whenever you're getting ready to put the timing chain on. That is a special tool. That is a tool number for it. And that's what we were doing. This was on a 2005 F-150 that we were putting timing chains on. Usually though, on those F-150s, if the oil pressure has dropped off enough to where they're rattling the timing chains and all, you're going to have worn cam saddles in the heads. And if you start going in there try to put timing chains in there and all that hogwash, you're going to wind up throwing good money after bad. If you have one with low oil pressure that's rattling the timing chains, you just need to go ahead and put a motor in there. Just get a rebuilt engine from whoever you buy your rebuilt engines from. Don't put a used one in there. You need to put a rebuilt one in there. And you know, it's kind of pricey, but that's the only way to protect yourself. What kind of problem would this cause? You've really seen these old GM vehicles, the trucks and all, and some of the cars. They wind up with these worn out tank sending units. You can buy just the sending unit part of it from the Chevrolet dealer for like $150. But some people will put a pump on there. That's what this one was for. This was an 07 Chevy pickup right here. What's being done in this photo? You recognize this? Have you seen this before? I was doing a transmission fluid exchange in that one there. And it's always gratifying to me to see that dark ugly fluid leaving and that brand new fluid going in there. The guy that was my big boss over there had a Mercedes. It was an 04 model. His wife was driving it. When he was bragging about how it was supposed to have lifetime transmission fluid in it. Well, when the transmission started giving trouble, he got the right fluid. I did a full fluid exchange on that Mercedes, and it completely took care of the transmission problem he was having. I've also done that on some Cadillacs and stuff. I'm out of time. Hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I will see you next time.